You are listening to Deep Friday on Next with Barter.
Remain calm. lovely, peaceful thought and count to 3.
See Beyond by Zombie Picnic from the album Rise of a New Ideology on our next Deep Friday edition this week. And I'd like to welcome Jim Griffin from the band to our podcast today. You have a very busy schedule going on, Jim, and thanks for taking time out for our listeners. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, hi there, Bernie. It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
The pleasure is all mine, Jim. Zombie Picnic have 2 albums out with A Suburb of Earth as well as Rise of a New Ideology, which are both fantastic albums, and we're going to play a selection of those today. But before we get to more music, I have some questions for you so our listeners can get to know you better if they're not familiar with you already. To start off with, can you give me some history on the band and its members?
Of course I can. So Zombie Picnic were established back in 2012, I think. Some of us have been in a band previously together. Brendan, the drummer, and Dave, the other guitar player. We had been together in a band called The Fewer the Better for a number of years. Different kind of band. And we really wanted to challenge ourselves and do something different and I think a little more musically adventurous. That previous band had been quite a straightforward rock band. So we were writing for a number of months, looking for a bass player, and that's when we found our buddy Brian Fitzgerald, who joined us on bass, and I suppose Zombie Picnic was born, or maybe unborn would be a better way of describing it.
Oh, the band was definitely born, and the prog world owes you a debt of thanks. Such great music. My next question for you, Jim. All artists have a wide array of influences that inspired them in their craft, and they would love to perform with some of them if given the chance. I know you've collaborated with a few rather large artists yourself, but if you could collaborate with anyone, who would that be and why?
Oh, that's a good question, Bernie. That's a tough one. You know, we've done, and I've done quite a few collaborations over our career. To date, we've worked with Chris Barron from the Spin Doctors previously. Did some work with Irish and American singer-songwriter Pierce Turner. We've done a lot of work with local musicians here in Limerick. We worked with Bernie Tormé, used to play guitar with the Ian Gillan Band, if you remember them, and he actually filled in for Randy Rhoads when he tragically died on Ozzy's first tour. So we've done a lot of collaborations with some people we really respect. For me, my influences are so varied. I think it's one of our strengths in Zombie Picnic that I come from a very kind of prog, 70s rock heavy background. Some of the guys in the band, they're a little bit younger than me, you know, just a small bit. So, you know, Brian, our bass player, he's into Mastodon, Slayer, he's our metalhead. Dave is into a lot of jazz, new wave kind of stuff. Brendan is a big Queens of the Stone Age, Mogwai kind of guy. So in the band, we've a lot of influences. Who would I like to play with? Look, you know, just to meet him, I'd love to get involved with doing some work with a guy of Neil Morse's quality. We don't have a keyboard player in the band, so it'd be handy to have a guy like him on board for a track. We don't do vocals in Zombie Picnic. We're kind of more instrumental. So for me, I'd love to work with a creative producer, engineer, someone at the caliber of Rich Mouser or Alan Parsons, or a creative DJ like Youth, who worked on the last Pink Floyd album. Actually, we discussed, we got in contact with Rich Mouser about maybe mixing some tracks on the last album, Rise of a New Ideology, but we couldn't quite make it work this time. Personally, I'd love to get some new instruments on our next album. There's a trumpet player called Eric Truffaz from France who's really experimental in what he does. Someone like that would be really extraordinary to work with. So we'd like to, if I was to do another collaboration again, I think we'd like to stretch it out a bit into some really unusual territory and see where we could go from there.
If you manage to get Neil Morse on board, make sure and let me know. Really varied influences with you all. I can see how all of them come into play, though, in your music. And we're going to listen to a couple of tracks now from Zombie Picnic, from the album A Suburb of Earth, Cylindrical Sea, and from Rise of a New Ideology, Life Support Systems. You're listening to Deep Friday with our guest Jim Griffin of Zombie Picnic.
of foreboding had come over him.
Zombie Picnic with Cylindrical Sea and Life Support Systems on our Deep Friday with Jim Griffin of Zombie Picnic. 2 excellent tracks. Jim, I get so many varied answers to my next question for you from indie artists because everyone experiences their own set of trials, but there are quite a few challenges being indie and lots of pros and cons with it. What are some of your biggest challenges you have as an indie artist?
Oh, indeed. Many challenges for any bands out there these days. Look, for us, one of the biggest, I think, frustrations, challenges, whatever you might want to call them, is in the live setting. We're a live band. A lot of prog bands tend to focus on studio. Because of our background, our history we discussed earlier, we write live, we work everything out together in the band room, and so we're a natural live act. So getting gigs in front of the correct audiences would be our number one challenge. Getting gigs itself isn't that difficult. You're a band, you go around, you can book a place, you'll play. But when you're playing instrumental prog rock, 15-minute guitar solos, this isn't necessarily what people want to hear in the corner of a pub in Limerick City or in Dublin or in Cork. So finding that prog audience, which is quite niche, and God knows we love them so much, but finding them, winkling them out of their man caves can be difficult. So getting access to the right festivals, we're continually trying to work our way into the UK, which just has that bigger market. The prog niche, the post-rock niche in Ireland is... it's there, it exists. There are some great promoters in Cork and Dublin and Limerick and Galway. But you can't overplay those markets. Maybe that's 1 or 2 gigs a year in each location. So just finding that niche, getting to play live in the UK, in Europe. It's there, it exists. We've been really lucky in getting access to a lot of prog reviews in the UK. We got into Prog Magazine coming out of the UK recently. So our biggest challenge is to try and just get into that niche and play live. We're selling in there in terms of records, but I think when you hear a band like Zombie Picnic live, you start to understand what we're all about. So that's our number one challenge. Look, it's not a problem. We're up for it. But that's the tricky bit, finding that correct audience. And when you find them and they realize there are bands like you playing the music they love, the response is always really positive. And you have that immediate connection. And we've had that a few times recently at a few small festivals we played, and we just want to build on that.
Definitely finding that niche is a tough one because there's just so much music out there and so many different places and ways to get heard, and it can be quite challenging finding just the right place that can benefit artists. Which brings me to my next question for you, Jim. If you could change just one thing about the music industry today relating to indie artists, what would that be?
Oh, wow. What would I change in the music industry? Well, Bernie, I hate to admit it, but I go back a bit. So I was offered my first record contract back in the mid to late 90s, believe it or not, with a label here in Ireland. It was actually the label that had just signed the Cranberries, believe it or not, who are also from Limerick. And so I remember what the music industry was like back then. And so, comparing it today, I know people have a lot of issues with the music industry today. It depends what you want out of it. I wouldn't change too much. For indie bands, you've got facilities like Bandcamp to get your music out there in physical and digital formats. The streaming services, look, they cause a lot of problems, but my God, they get you in front of a huge audience, and they help you find that target audience I was just talking about. In terms of record labels, there's tons of micro labels out there that can help you get the music into those pockets of fans. And despite what I was saying earlier about difficulty in finding the right gig slots, they do exist, and there is a healthy festival scene. I think the indie music scene is in a really healthy state. If I was going to change one thing about it, I would change the attitudes of the bands in the industry. Look, the industry is what it is. It's economics, it's business. You got to respect that. I do think some of the younger bands kind of feel that they're owed a living in music. It was never that way, and it never will be. It's there's great bands out there, and they work so hard. I just think they need to keep an eye on things like the production values, editing the material. The temptation is to put so much material into the marketplace, and I do think that's a mistake. I think the prog scene is leading the way in this. The quality of material that bands are making is superb. The dedication to the production values, and that's thanks to guys like Stephen Wilson and Mike and Ackerfeld who just raised the production bar for all of us so high. That's a good thing. I think the bands need to step up and not try and change the industry, but work within the industry. It's fragmented. It's difficult to hit your markets, but the potential that's there is way beyond anything that I ever used to encounter back in the 90s or the early 2000s in whatever bands I was in those days.
Streaming is so incredibly controversial with many artists, mostly in terms of the royalties paid, but yes, they do help you get heard, and if you find a really good playlist to get on, then that can make a world of difference as well. And agreed again, artists need to learn how to work with the industry instead of balking at it, because things aren't going to change, and you need to find a way to work with them, like it or not. Also agree with you on the prog world leading the way. So many amazing prog artists out there now. And I'm going to change gears on you, Jim. You also have some beautiful solo work out there. And can you give our listeners a little bit more info on that?
Oh, thank you, Barney. That's very kind of you to say so. Look, my solo work started about 6 or 7 years ago. I found a small label in the UK run by a wonderful guy called Roger Linney. The label is called Reverb Worship, and your listeners really should check it out. There's some incredible music that he puts out. Just really underground, unusual stuff. I suppose in between bands, so in about 2011, between one band and really before Zombie Picnic had kicked off, I started work on just some solo stuff. So Zombie Picnic's material, there's a lot of light and shade in it, but there isn't a lot of acoustic guitar, and certainly there's no singing. And those are two things that I kind of enjoy doing, playing acoustic guitar, doing a bit of singing. So it was nice to work on some solo material that encompassed them very much in a prog space. Believe it or not, some of the solo material probably is longer tracks than Zombie Picnic. So you've been playing some Zombie Picnic stuff tonight. Some of my solo tracks are 14 minutes long. The first solo album I had was just a single 42-minute track. It tends to be full-on kind of acoustic prog. You know, if any of your listeners are into Camel or Mike Oldfield or stuff like that, I think they might enjoy what I do on my solo stuff. It's a little full on for the guys in Zombie Picnic. Like I say, we come from a lot of different backgrounds, and that's the strength of that band. So my solo material is where I get to really stretch those proggy 70s aching back muscles of mine, and I really go for it. And they're released on Reverb Worship in really kind of small runs of beautifully made CDs. It's all there on Bandcamp under Jim Griffin. You'll find me if you're interested, or drop me a line. I'll send you a copy. It's fine. And it's a little unusual. The content is drawn from things of personal interest of mine, the work of H.P. Lovecraft, the haiku of Basho, the scenery around the west of Ireland. That's kind of what inspires my solo work, and I really enjoy doing that when I have the time. So in between Zombie Picnic, which is the main project, I'll pick up an acoustic guitar or some unusual Eastern instruments and start putting some work together on, you know, what hopefully will be another solo album in a couple of years' time.
Well, I'm definitely up for your next album. We're going to listen to one of those very long tracks that we were talking about from Jim's To a Far City solo album for you today. One of my favorite tracks from the album, An Ocean Mind. You're listening to Next Deep Friday with special guest Jim Griffin of Zombie Picnic.
Come on now and don't be late. Come on now and don't be too late. Come on now and don't delay. There's a journey that I've got to
Jim Griffin and An Ocean Mind from his solo album To a Far City on our Deep Friday. So Jim, what's in the future plans for Zombie Picnic?
So our future plans for world domination, Bernie. Look, in Zombie Picnic, we're writing the third album. I think this is a really important album for us. This one is building on what's been a really growing fan base for us. So we need to get this one right. I think we're going to get a little more space rock and a little more conceptual on it. In terms of solo work, I definitely have some ideas in my head, getting weirder by the minute. Hopefully over Christmas, that's usually a very productive time for me. I can get some of those down and start to put some shape on them. But it's Zombie Picnic, album number 3 all the way. Look out for it. It'll be out, I'd say, later next year. And thanks to support from Bernie, from yourself, from so many great prog review and prog podcasts. We really just feel we're stretching all over the world. So thanks very much for that.
World domination could work. Make sure and keep us up to date, though, on things. And looking forward to seeing what Zombie Picnic and your solo projects may bring our way in the future. And as usual, I'll have more info on Zombie Picnic and Jim Griffin on my social media, so you can check them out. And make sure to pick up your copies of Zombie Picnic's excellent music, as well as Jim's solo work, on Bandcamp. And I'll post links for those as well on my Facebook podcast page for you. Once again, Jim, I want to thank you for your time on this podcast. It's been a real pleasure to have you here today, and wishing you much success. Thanks for tuning in to this Deep Friday special with special guest Jim Griffin, and make sure to catch the other podcasts during the week for more great music. Thanks for tuning in, and we're going to let you close things out for us with another excellent track from Zombie Picnic, Jim. So take it away.
Cheers, Bernie. For the last track tonight, I think we'll pick our track Anger in Storage. It closes out our second album, Rise of a New Ideology. There's a great live version of this on an archives set, Rise of the Archives, we just released there last month. I have to tell you that the spoken word passage in the middle is actually the work of my lovely wife, Evelyn Cosgrave. So I have to pick this one, and it's a good short one. It's a good bruiser of a track to close out with. So this is Zombie Picnic, Anger in Storage, Denial Will Follow.